Honourable members, when the suspension was made earlier, we were discussing resolution number 7, the National Housing Corporation, the the Ministry of Housing and Lands, and with that we will wish to continue. Honourable members, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Oh, the honourable member for the city is online, and therefore we will wish to accommodate him right now. Honourable member, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Acting. First, let me start by congratulating you in playing the role that you're playing today and saying what a good job you're doing thus far. I want to register my congratulations there. Firstly, Ma'am, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity and accommodating me in this debate today on this resolution, which speaks not only to my constituency in the city of Bridgetown, but speaks to the government's role and the government's determination to ensure that we bring improvements to the lives of Barbadians. Barbadians who, on 2 occasions, registered their overwhelming confidence in this government, and this government returning that confidence in the people by ensuring that we provide and that we deliver for them. I come to this debate, ma'am, with a heart full of gratitude and a heart full of thanks. And I want to start by thanking the 2 honourable members that went before me, ma'am. The honourable member for St. George South, the current Minister of Housing, and the senior minister, the member for Christchurch West. I believe that both of them did justice to the resolution in laying out a resolution like I have not seen since I started to sit in these honourable chambers, and I want to congratulate them, ma'am, for that. Ma'am, I promise to be short and surgical. My mission here in this debate, ma'am, is really to point out to my constituents and to the people of Barbados, exactly from the heart, what is happening with resolutions that we are bringing week after week, that speaks not to a government living in the past, speaks not to actions by politicians around the world, but to actions that are taken on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, in the best interest of the people and the country that each and every one of us serve. And that is why I want to thank the Minister of Housing. That is why I want to thank the Prime Minister for her leadership. That is why I want to thank the former member for the city of Bridgetown for facing and fixing with the team the issue of flooding, which I want to talk about in a very serious way momentarily. I want to thank the Barbados Labour Party, and I want to thank the people of the city for giving us the opportunity to represent you, and I want to thank the people of Barbados for making all of this possible and happen. And this does not happen by accident. And if you doubt me, I point the country to recent history, and I will take them back to 1970 and come forward again. Recent history, as pointed out by the member for Christchurch West and the honourable member for St. George South. The fact that administrations of the past, the last administration before this one, had upward of $80 million to correct an housing issue in Greenfield and Castle, and look at what was the result of that. So in times when there was money to upgrade for the people in the city of Bridgetown and for Barbados, it wasn't done. And about half of that money was returned to the IDB when Barbados needed it most. And now we are in an environment, ma'am, and an environment, a very difficult environment by all measures across the world. And we are finding it possible to deliver, to build, to improve in these difficult times without that type of funding that we could do it right now. And that is why I come with a heart of gratitude and say on behalf of my constituents that I represent, that send me in here to speak on their behalf, that today I can get up honestly, sincerely, from the heart and say thank you. And say thank you, a job well done, for facing a problem and fixing it. Yes, there's more to go, but particularly in the Murphy's Pastor situation, I can tell you, because as some members in here know, that when this issue was being addressed, I was in another place. I was in another place when we were hearing of the constant flooding in the city of Bridgetown, particularly in Chapman Lane, in the Murphy's Pastor area. And I, back then, felt as though this is something that needs to be highlighted. This is something that needs to be studied. This is something that needs to be addressed. And it was highlighted and it was studied. And the members of this chamber can feel proud to know that it is something that has been addressed. And I can speak to it now from first-hand experience. First-hand experience in that, on given the privilege and the honor to represent the constituency, when I got my first rainfalls, I put on my boots, and I am not ashamed, ma'am, to say on the first occasion, I was supported by the honorable member who sits right close to me, the honorable member for St. Lucie, who, thank God, wears the same boot size as me, was able to lend me some boots to run and check. And every time the rain set up, my heart was set up too, ma'am. Madam Speaker, my heart was set up too, because I would be saying to myself, what do I have to deal with as the rains come in? And then running to the city firsthand to see, all I could see, ma'am, is dry roads and dry faces. People happy and very impressed with the fact that no longer do they have to take their furniture out of the house. No longer do they have to push water through the front door. No longer do they have to abandon their properties when the rain come in and flood them. And even so, I was given a taste on one occasion when the pumps that the honorable member for Christchurch West spoke about did not kick in, but not because provisions were not there or they were not facilitated to be there, but by man-made error when the manual pump was not activated and the automatic pumps were not reset. I got a glimpse and I got to peep and see what would happen if those pumps were not installed. Because after a few rains, on one occasion, when the pumps were not activated, I started to get the calls and the videos and the messages showing me outdoor bathrooms flooded, houses flooded, furniture flooded. And I made my way down to the city, and I made my way down to the pumping station. I was facilitated by the drainage unit, and I want to thank them for facilitating me, and got the issue sorted in a matter of a few hours. I was able to tour the entire canal project to see where the blockages were. And again, I use this opportunity to remind Barbadians that we are in this together, because some of the blockages in the canal was not caused by lack of work of the drainage department. It was not caused by lack of work of the government trying to fix the problem. It was blocked by garbage and litter. And where does garbage and litter come from, madam? It does not come from the sky. Pet bottles do not appear like mist and dew. So this is my call. I'm using this opportunity, ma'am, as I thank the authorities and I thank the administration for looking out for the people of Barbados. I also use the opportunity to remind Barbadians that when you litter, you can cause no end of problems for everyone, from the mosquito, the rats, the vectors, to the flooding, to the unsightliness of your own communities. So I use that opportunity, no ma'am. So I am saying from first-hand knowledge, I am speaking today from seeing what happened when the pumps were not activated, from seeing what happened when the drains were flooded by the litter, that we were able to click that switch, and I saw the pumps in action, taking the water out of the community and bringing relief to people. So I must commend us for facing and fixing that. Now to the resolution today, where we bring this Section 5 Land Acquisition Act to the Kensington New Road, Beckers Land, to do the residing of persons who are extremely close to the canal. I believe that this is a move in the right direction, and it is only part of a move, ma'am. A move under the Murphy's Pastor Redevelopment Project. Now, I know sometimes, depending on how these things are carried in the media and carried in the press, that my phone and the Honourable Member for St. George South phone will be going off because people will hear houses building and they will automatically assume a whole set of new houses went up. And therefore, they will be calling down the house to get a house. But I want to make it clear and make sure that this resolution is fully understood by all listening. That all that is happening here right now is some houses are being constructed to move people who are in the flood zone, who are being in the area where the canal is and it has been expanded. That is all that's happening at this point in time. But as the good Minister of Housing said, there are other housing opportunities coming, and I can use the opportunity to ask for the patience and cooperation and for persons really to take a step back and to look at the trajectory that the government is on. Because in times gone by, we had a situation where sometimes you would get 100 houses in a year or a term, 500 houses. But you have an administration who in the most difficult time worldwide has committed to doing 10,000 houses because we understand the needs of our people. And housing is a big one. It is not only a need, it is a right. A right that we understand, a right that we appreciate, and a right that we are addressing. If any member of the public was to take time out and pause and listen and look and read the situation, don't just listen to the words, but look at the passion and sincerity that the Minister of Housing, the Honourable Member for St. George South, and his the Senior Minister for Infrastructure from Christchurch West, whenever they speak on housing, you do not get fake dramatics. You can see that they are sincerely investing, ma'am, in making sure that we improve the housing conditions in Barbados and the housing conditions for Barbadians. There's no two ways about it. So, ma'am, as I said earlier, my intention was to be short, to be succinct, and to be surgical. So I have used my time to explain to those listening what this resolution is about, to put it in context, to ensure that we pay gratitude where gratitude is necessary, because people believe that as a government things will automatically happen. But you have to have a government that has the political will. You have to have the government that has the political intelligence in terms of how to finance these projects, to make sure that they are in tune with the technocrats, that when these projects are done, they are successful. Too many times, people have the impression with examples across the world where politicians will promise and nothing delivered, where politicians will get involved in projects and you can hear about cost overruns and the lining of pockets. But I want Barbados to look inward, and I want Barbados to look in the mirror, and I want Barbados to look at these various projects and see and understand the fact that you have an administration working day in and day out to your horse, to your figure, to your gain sleep, to ensure that the manifesto promises are fulfilled and that the voices of the people are the voices of God, and that we implement what we say we will implement, and we will do the things that we say we will do. Because sometimes, ma'am, I'm not very familiar with how these things work. There are people out there who will seek to divide us. There are people out there who will seek to confuse us. There are people out there that will seek to make us believe that nothing good is happening. Can any good come from Nazareth? Man. That is what you would find. And if you listen sometimes, and if you read sometimes, you would believe that. And that is why I believe it is important for us who have the knowledge to use our voice and use every opportunity to point out in a sincere, genuine, and honest way to the people that we serve that we are on the job. We are on the job. We are behind the wheel. We are using the GPS. Our hands are firmly on the steering wheel. And we're going first, second, third gear. No park, no reverse. And that is the message I want to close with. And I want for my constituents, and I want for Barbadians, to make sure that as we move this along, we have to be realistic. So I am begging and pleading with you for your cooperation, for your patience, as we make Barbados an inclusive, resilient, safer, sustainable, and prosperous country. And I make the call to my colleagues, if each of us be the best MP that we can be, that we be the best minister that we can be, that we be the best chairman, be the best whatever, then Barbados will be the best that it can be. Madam Chair Acting, I support this resolution 100%, and I am obliged. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Your Honour. And congratulations on your position in this chair. It will be wonderful in these few words to be able to say, Madam Speaker. Always wanted to say that. I rise to support this resolution. I, like the member who spoke before me, intend to be brief, but I believe firmly that there are certain things that bear repeating in sectors such as this that are not straightforward, wherein the solutions call for multiple interventions from multiple actors. Sometimes we know and we hear and we identify that there's a Ministry of Housing and Lands, and we believe that every housing solution or every housing question must be identified or can be addressed through that ministry. And the fact is, it cannot, because these issues are whole of government issues, and they call for the concerted effort of many of the arms of government. Madam Speaker, as I was reflecting on this resolution, I remembered an incident or a series of events when I was growing up in St. Clair Road. We used to call St. Clair Bottom. We used to walk home from Belmont Primary. And the reason people called it St. Clair Bottom was that it was a bottom. It is a bottom. When you turn through from Bird Hill, opposite the Antioch Church, there is a bit of a dip in the road, and then you proceed up the hill, and our family lived on the top of the hill. Now, in those days, the representative with whom we often had conversation, including me as a child of about 7 or 8 years old, carried the name of the Honourable Leader of Government Business in this place, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South East. At that time, we were St. Michael Southeast before the lines were redrawn and we became St. Michael East. But Madam Speaker, I recall a conversation, in those days, your parents used to shoo you away and say, big people talking. But when the representative was there, she didn't do that. Because I believe that my mother wanted to show us how you advocate for what you need. And she believed that you were never too young to be able to advocate for what you need. And I remember her having a conversation with Mr. Bradshaw, the then MP, about the issue of drainage in St. Clair Bottom, and saying to him, my children walk home from school, and many days I have to send their father on his bicycle to make sure that they don't get washed away when it rains. There were times that I woke up in the morning getting ready for school and I realized that it was raining, or it would be raining that day. And it was a whole choreography to figure out how you would get back home. Because you're walking back home through the train line, which would have been muddy. And then you know that by the time you get to St. Clair Bottom, you had to do some real acrobatics. There were 3 of us, and the oldest one had to climb up on the side, and the one in the middle who was a bit taller had to stretch her arms and try and help me, who was the smallest, get through the water. My mother said to the MP at the time, listen, I cannot afford to be at work and to be concerned about my children getting home safely from school. And I remember the process, and I think that had to be perhaps one of my earliest introduction to the question of political advocacy and representation. Because I remember the conversation where the MP at the time said, I understand, and I have to make representation to get some drainage addressed in St. Clair Bottom. And for a child at school who has to live through or who has to experience, sometimes we feel that children's lives are easy, but children's worlds are small. And there can be a sense of terror about things that we think as adults are normal, but children are very afraid of. The first day that I came home from school and I realized that it had rained all day, but I could walk on the road, up the hill to get home without being afraid. That was a life-changing moment. It was a life-changing moment. Sometimes we think that these things are small, but for families, these things are tremendous. And so the issue of the flooding in Murphy's Pasture, that this resolution through the acquisition of these lands seeks to address, having created the floodplain, but then also having to recite and rehome the families that continue to be affected. This is something that resonates, I'm sure, with all of us. This is something that I understand. I further understand, not just because of the experience in St. Clair Road, but also because of the experience in Halls Road in the constituency of St. Michael South Central. The Honourable Senior Minister, Member for Christchurch West, has spoken with respect to that project about how when he was Minister responsible for Works, he and I and as many colleagues as could lend their elbow grease to the task often had to visit when there was bad weather predicted, often had to visit that canal in Halls Road and make sure that at least for the next couple days, we were doing some short-term mitigation work that would mean that there would be no flooding, no overflowing of the canal, and so on. In fact, I heard a gentleman relating a story the other day, and he said he was talking about flooding that was happening, not rain-related, but a man-made event. But he was talking about flooding that was happening, and he said, you would think that down here was Constitution River when it rains, and then he corrected himself. And then he said, oh no, but I forget that they don't have that flooding in Halls Road anymore. And I was very glad he corrected himself, because I'm also glad that having experienced some of these similar issues to the residents of Murphy's Pasture, that those people who live in Halls Road, who were affected by the overflowing of the canal when we had very bad weather and heavy rainfall, those conditions have also been ameliorated by the approach to the rebuilding of the canal that we've seen with the Constitution River project. There is a similar issue with respect to some of the residents of Ellis Village, and I am advised by the Honourable Member for St. George South that those conversations and those engagements with the residents of Ellis Village continue to make sure that we understand exactly what people need, what is affecting them in terms of where they're located relative to the canal, and whether if there's relocation that has to happen, how that will take place. And I know that that has been an issue that we've been discussing for some time in the context of that Constitution River project. I have the promise and the assurance of the minister of both ministers, that those conversations are ongoing, because as I say in this honorable place all the time, people don't live in constituencies, they live in communities. And just like there was a redrawing exercise between St. Michael Southeast and St. Michael East, I don't know if there will ever be one between the city of Bridgetown and St. Michael South Central, but if there were to be, one might understand if Ellis Village were withdrawn within the boundaries of St. Michael South Central. Not that I want to take away the lovely residents from the Honourable Member for the city of Bridgetown, but that is a part of one community. Families live on either side, the same family living on either side of the road. I don't want to claim them from the Honourable Member, but I can't help but love them because they are a part of our family. And so I have every confidence that those conversations will continue. I know there was a social survey done some time ago, and I know that there are efforts as well to update that survey and to understand what people want, what people expect, how people live, how people want to live, how people want to live. Because sometimes we think we know, but we have to ask, we have to understand, we have to see, hear, and feel how people want to live. And so that continues. But I want, just briefly, to step back a bit to consider, as I have been, the overall question of housing and where we are and where we need to be, and really, what is its role? And I do that because I think that this is an area that the entire world is grappling with, like so many that we are facing. We see in many places in Asia that the way that people must live because of the issue of population is a way that is very different from the way in which we live in Barbados, from the way in which we live in the Caribbean. People often live in very small quarters. I have a colleague who lives in Asia and who recently sent me some photos of her new apartment that I will tell you, and I said to her, if I had to contemplate a Barbadian family living in these quarters, I am not sure how it could work, because it was a single room. There were about 2,000 of them in the building, in the high-rise building, and I believe the square footage, let's just say it did not reach the kind of square footage that we associate with comfortable living in Barbados. But I think that because they appreciate that issues of space and issues of population are affecting them to such an extent that in many ways culturally, a different way of living is one that has been accepted. I think to some extent here in Barbados as well. There are young people who do not wish to have vast expanses of land or backyard to maintain, but who are willing, and I know many of them, who, for example, would love to live in the Treasury building and come downstairs and hang out at a bar or have an art gallery on the second floor and to be close to town. You know, to be in Bridgetown, to be close to some of the amenities. Of course, in order to make that a complete circle, we have to be able to see new investment in the city of Bridgetown. But I say these things because I believe that we have to check in with people to understand how it is they want to live. Because a lot of the assumptions that we have about the way that people want to live and what they prioritize may not still today in 2022 apply. And I dare say that if we have that approach, that many of the issues that bedevil us in the housing and land sector may cease to be issues. I further have confidence in the approach of the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance insofar as there are different models of housing being used. We could never have, and when I say we, I mean Barbados, could never could consider getting to where we need to, being able to achieve the number of housing solutions that we need to with the traditional approach to government building houses. That was always a non-starter. And so having, through the HOPE program, through different kinds of physical models, steel frame structures and so on, once perfected, once we get the speed and the scale with respect to those new models, they will start to solve a lot of problems. But I also feel that when I say that we need to check in on how people want to live, that we should not rule out the issue of high-rise housing. Executed in a certain way, delivered in a certain way, for people who would not object to living, to buying, to renting to own apartments, just like many of us did when we lived in other parts of the world, townhouses, condos, small apartments, because while we have enough land to accommodate those who live here now, the issue of housing solutions, the cost of building houses, the fact that many of the people who require housing solutions would not ordinarily, because of their age and so on, qualify for a standard mortgage, we need to continue the innovative path that the Ministry of Housing and Lands has started, because we need to meet speed and we need to meet scale. Madam Speaker, we need to meet speed and scale, not just with respect to the generations that are coming that will need housing, but we need to meet speed and scale with respect to the things that are confronting us now. Hurricane Elsa and related events. But then the things that we have to deal with every day, like when there's a house fire. The things that we have to deal with every day, like when there are cases of intimate partner or other domestic violence. When people are unhoused because they must leave a dangerous situation. There are all kinds of urgent housing circumstances that are not related to disaster. There are all kinds of pre-existing, when Hurricane Elsa hit, there were pre-existing emergency housing issues. And so the speed and scale in the housing sector is also required because we face those issues every day. The other challenge that we have and that the whole of government has, because this now is not just a Ministry of Housing issue, but it's one that I must echo, must repeat, because I have constituents in St. Michael South Central who simply want to be able to purchase the land, the small little pocket of land on which their little house stands. They simply want to be able, living on tenantry land, to be able to have those lands, that property conveyed, so that they can say that they own something, so that they can go to a bank or other financial institution and be able to use it to advance their lives and those of their children. The issue of housing is not just about having somewhere to sleep and getting out of the sun and the rain. It is also about having an asset that you can make productive for you and your family. And I see this, Madam Speaker, as low-hanging fruit for this administration. I do. Because I feel as if, and I can only speak in this instance for urban St. Michael, for urban Barbados, for St. Michael South Central, but I feel as if we can complete that exercise where we know that we have people who have begun a process, where we know that we need to simply complete the conveyance of these lands. Let us do that. Because then we are solving the housing issue more easily and more readily without having to look for major capital outlay from the member through the member for St. George South, who may find that the demand may sometimes outstrip the flow of to his ministry. The role and purpose of housing in a 2022 Barbados is not just about having somewhere to lie down. It's about having something to call yours, because ownership matters. And similarly, the issue of being able to identify derelict structures, as the resolution makes reference to, or as is the intent behind the resolution, to be able to understand what are the opportunities for us to remove these abandoned structures that in some cases, in several cases, are health hazards to the people living in those communities, and to make meaningful use of that space is critical. As a special project in this country, it is critical that we understand what is the status of these structures. You know, it seems to me, as I wrap up, Your Honor, that there are so many issues bound up in the housing challenge that we have, in the ownership challenge that we have. And one of those has to do with how we parse or how we pick apart what are some of the challenges, right? So, for example, the issue of estate. To whom does something belong when someone passes? If there's one piece of advice I give to people, it is, I don't care if you are 10, 20, 40, 60, sort out your affairs. Sort out your estate, determine what it is that you have, to whom you would wish it to pass, because when you don't, generations that are coming after cannot benefit from what you have worked so hard to deliver to them. And one of the issues that is challenging us as a nation is this issue of estate planning, of being able to identify who is the rightful owner of a property, what are the succession issues, so that people can really have assets. I don't know, Madam Speaker, what is the answer? I know that the financial literacy program is meant to address this. I believe that we may need, and I am the last person to oversell the use of incentives because I think that they're often overused. But in this case, I feel we need to incentivize the population to get their affairs in order, because I see too many cases of people who believe that they own something because their grandmother wanted them to have it, only to find out that they don't own it, they can't do anything with it. And then what often happens is that a lot of these derelict structures that we see can never be of any use to anyone because ownership cannot be established. And so these are some of the areas that I think are part of the puzzle of the housing and land and ownership puzzle if we really want to use the sector to help empower Barbadians. So Madam Speaker, I support this resolution to continue to bring relief and to address the flooding issues in this area of Bridgetown. I support the efforts of the Honourable Member and his ministry for being out in the sun and the rain and understanding what are the challenges across Barbados. I believe that we must be able to address and understand issues of speed and scale in the sector, because really that's what we need to be able to really offer solutions, because solutions offered slowly are less effective and less impactful than those that meet people's needs as they occur. And finally, I want to encourage us to pick some of the low-hanging fruit, to look at the issue of tenantry land and the extent to which we can convey those lands to people so they have an asset to call their own. And with those few words, Madam Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank you,
Honourable
Madam.
Member for St. Michael Southeast.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Acting. This debate, on the face of it, is for the compulsory acquisition of lands to be able to alleviate the challenges of flooding in the area known as Murphy Pasture in St. Michael. But it is clear from the speeches which have gone, certainly before me, that it has stirred up even wider debate in relation to certain philosophies that underpin this administration in making life better for not some Barbadians, not Barbados Labour Party Barbadians, but making life better for all Barbadians wherever it is possible. I start there, Madam Speaker Acting, because each of the speakers that have gone before me have touched on areas not only related to housing, but on the social programs that are necessary to bring change to ordinary Barbadians. The area we are talking about is an area in the city, area which is spanning between the Emerton and the Chapman Lane housing districts. It is located to the west of the St. Mary's Primary School. When we think of the area of Bridgetown, historically, this is the area where a number of people settled. It was the area where the merchant class was engaged in trading. It was the area where former slaves also came into the city to ply their trade, certainly in the period after emancipation. And people settled. People settled not because somebody told them they could put a house structure in a particular area, or because they had some master plan as to where sewage systems were, or where there was running water, or there was electricity. But people settled in many cases across Barbados, and in particular in the city, because there was no other place to go. And there were no regulations, no laws to guide that class of persons as we came out of that emancipation period to be able to make that transition in our history. So for many years, we have had issues related to flooding. We have perhaps now reached that peak where it is no longer just a concern of one particular district, but we are seeing, particularly with the issues of climate change, we are seeing that flooding is happening across the country in very short time frames. I think the other night I was having a meal, and I would call a downpour. I heard a downpour. It lasted for longer than it normally would, and there was just a barrage of water on our roads and resultant flooding in many districts. And I'm sure, Honourable Madam Speaker, I'm sure that the people of St. Thomas, who are never spared anything, were also the victims of some of that issues of climate change. This area at Murphy Pasture, though, has plagued both administrations. Certainly from being in opposition, we had the issues where we would have heard the then administration speak about being able to address these issues, to be able to relocate the residents in the area, to improve the urban landscape, to make life as well better for ordinary Barbadians. The Prime Minister in 2020 would have visited, as you heard earlier, with other ministers to be able to look at the conditions that people were facing and again, once and for all, make some decisions in relation to alleviating the problems that we've been facing with the flooding over the years. This area is also particularly significant because it collects the storm water runoff from a catchment of approximately 77 hectares. The catchment encompasses the White Park area, the Strathclyde area, Eagle Hall, Barbries Hill, the southern portion of the New Orleans and the Upper Reed Street area. And what happens is that the runoff is then conveyed to the Princess Alice Pump House via a storm drain to the north of the Emerton sewage plant. And that crosses by the Fontebelle Road and then north of what we would call the Brankers commercial property across from the old gas station. The fact of the matter is that the water is coming from other areas. That's the fundamental point. It is not the water that is just emanating in that area, but because of our topography, because of our geography, water doesn't just fall in a particular area and stay there. The water sometimes, because of the various elevations, moves its way through the city areas and through the country and ends up sometimes in a low-lying area. And unfortunately, because of the areas that lead to the Murphy Pasture, we find ourselves in a situation where over the years, successive administrations or administration have been plagued with what do you do in order to really alleviate this issue. But the work of addressing drainage is a complex issue. And I say it is complex because the truth of the matter is, having inherited this ministry, successive ministers themselves have been plagued with all the phone calls from the public, from the MPs in relation to areas of flooding every time there is heavy rainfall, and it has gotten worse. So what we do now is nothing different than what others have done. Perhaps it is worse only because we are getting unpredictable weather, which is causing even rainfall in areas of large quantities that ordinarily may not have had that large catchment of water. But what makes this issue particularly complex is because, as I said earlier, people have chosen to reside in what we call the densely populated areas or in areas which are flood prone. And for sometimes the ministries to go in to alleviate the problems, you can't just go in and fix the flooding unless you move houses. You can't go in and fix the flooding unless you address sometimes the issues of sewage, because in many cases they haven't connected the sewage, either because you can't or because you don't have the resources to be able to do it. Equally, I think we are all well aware that we still have the plaguing problems in some of these communities in relation to the pit toilets as well. And so when we think of how do we solve the problems, it is not just sometimes that we can dig a well or we can have a detention pond alone. Sometimes there is a lot more work and thought that has to go into actually relocating individuals from a particular area and solving the problem. If you take places like the Scotland district, well, again, you have the issues of the soil. You have the slippage, you have the type of clay soil that it is. I too have discovered as minister that it is not so straightforward to find a solution in the Scotland district for flooding as well, because you have challenges in terms of the slippage, and in addition to that, you may spend money this year, but then next year you're going to have a similar problem arising. And so it requires engineers to get on board. Sometimes it requires the persons who do the designs to be able to come on board, to be able to advise of the appropriate methodology that must be used in order to alleviate these problems. But we also have, and the Honourable Member for the City touched on this, the issue of the indiscriminate disposal of plastics in particular, that is also contributing to some of the challenges that we face in relation to flooding. The call has to be made for average Barbadians to take responsibility for not just around their homes, but in their communities as well. I grew up in Brandon's, and I must tell you, there were old ladies in the district, including my grandmother, who would find themselves outside early on mornings when the cocks are crowing, trying to ensure that they cleaned up not just the gutters, but they cleaned up the house around each of the premises. And they undertook this task not because they were getting a stipend for doing it by the government, but because they came up with a principle that you had to look after home, you had to look after community. Perhaps we have moved away somewhat from that, and the first thing that we do when there is flooding or there's any issues is that we call the MP, we call the drainage unit, we call somebody else, as opposed to looking at what is our responsibility as well as homeowners, as tenants within a house, to be able to ensure that we keep around our premises clean as well. And so Barbadians have to take that responsibility. I'm grateful that the Ministry of the Environment has introduced through the garbage cans at the households, an opportunity for people to separate their garbage. I look forward to that recycling program certainly being able to take place. But the Honourable Member for the city can tell you that one of the biggest issues within the city has also been the issue of plastics. People are coming out of the shops, they drop the litter along the road. And so Barbadians, while we are complaining about challenges related to an area that is flooding, have to appreciate that we have a responsibility to make sure that the drains are cleared and areas that surround the districts are also clear. Now, that doesn't take away from the responsibility of drainage and the government to make sure that it does the heavier lifting in these situations, but I simply say that this is a case of all hands on deck and not a case of pointing fingers at any particular individual or entity in this country. What we did in Murphy Pasture, as you would have heard some of it earlier, was that they had to basically convert a portion of an elevated community space into what is known as a detention pond. And that had to be placed below the levels of the housing district. The reason for this is that it would reduce the flood levels in and about the houses. They also looked at reconstructing a larger storm drain within the limits of the dense housing area, and also having to take the utility structures and also realign those as well. There was the provision of an even gradient of a drain between the Mason Hall Street area and the Fontebelle Road, and they had to look at addressing a new drain to have a greater runoff holding capacity, again to ensure that the water could run off and that it would not remain in any particular area unnecessarily long. They constructed a new culvert at the Chapman Cross Lane, regraded part of 3rd Avenue Chapman Lane in order to shift the low point towards the storm drain, and removed what would be considered negative stormwater impacts on the individual housing sewage systems. The reality is that a lot of the water that settles in these areas as a result of the flooding results in a lot of unnecessary debris in areas. It breeds mosquitoes. You're constantly having to call out the drainage unit in order to pump off water to avoid a lot of these other issues that arise as a result of the water being able to settle in these areas. And it therefore means that this becomes a serious problem for not just the drainage unit, but it becomes an environmental issue and a health issue as well if we don't seek to get this right. So when the Prime Minister moved in with the other ministers to address this at the time, a few decisions were taken in terms of rethinking that particular area. There was a construction of a retention pond. They resurfaced the 3rd Avenue Chapman Lane. They constructed one new well and also cleaned 8 of the wells in Barbries Hill and Peterkin. They reconstructed the Murphy Pasture drain, which is the one that we continue to talk mostly about, but they also did reconstruction at the Emerson Pasture drain as well, because it is not just the area of Murphy Pasture that is of concern, but you have to appreciate that we have to capture the water and stop the water from getting into the areas where the housing is most affected. One of the major solutions that has been found, though, to be effective across the country has been what is known as detention ponds. It is one of the main areas where across the country, I don't think people even realize the amount of detention ponds that we have introduced into Barbados's landscape over the past few years. But in keeping with what is known as an integrated flood management approach, apart from telling people clean up around them, there is also the approach where we try to capture water before it gets downstream to houses and to break it up before it actually gets into people's homes. The first one was constructed all the way back in 2002. And the history of it, from what I am told, dates back to when we were a plantation society. And apparently what used to happen is that they used to use this methodology of capturing the water away from the plantation before it actually got into affecting the households as well. So it is not anything that is new in terms of perhaps the technology. It is something that certainly our foreparents no doubt would have utilized. But again, as happens, we've had to employ this methodology in order to capture the water and to stop it from affecting households. The number of ponds that we started ponds in 2020. I have a list here of some 28 locations that we did across the island, places like Colleton, Plantation Cottage, Brighton Road, Rose Gate, Clark Road, in Westmount Brevita, Salters, Tenantry Road. And just to say, Acting Speaker, that one of the things, certainly in my own constituency, that has concerned me has been that even when I was not minister or then representative, even before, there were concerns that I raised in relation to, for instance, this Salters Tenantry Road area. And the Honourable Member for St. Michael East would be well familiar with the challenges out there. Lots of water, when the rains fell, and there were challenges in terms of the wells being cleared and those types of things. They put in the detention pond, and you still have the settlement of water, in particular on some of the residents' properties, which obviously creates the issues of, as I said before, of mosquitoes and those types of things. So it is not a case of that work hasn't been done, but I'm also told that it is a work in progress, in that they've started with that, they've had to dig additional wells. They also have to look at the acquisition of, in many cases in those areas, the acquisition of private lands as well, in order to be able to continue to do works, to be able to capture the water. And one of my fears has been, as I look at some of the detention ponds, is the fact that in a lot of these areas you may have children within communities who, when there are heavy rains and the water settles, they are curious about the going into the water, putting little makeshift boats into the water and sending them through. And these are real concerns that we must all have. But we have to educate the public, we have to educate our young people about the way in which we have had to, in a sense, identify different ways of trying to be able to make sure that we don't create another problem in terms of having flooding. So those are all things that we need to be cognizant of. We're going to do some work to make people even more aware of the detention ponds, making sure that, again, they're clearly identified so people know the dangers, in particular with our kids. But we have to do this work, and we have seen the benefit of this work by so doing, because many of the people across the country are not experiencing the same levels of issues in terms of flooding as they once did. In 2021, we did another 20 locations, and those locations again range across the country. So while we see, after we've gotten heavy downpours of rain, we see a large percentage of water in areas. We saw it down in Trents and those areas recently. Some of this is also as a result of work that has already been done. But again, we as ministries, we cannot plan for Mother Nature. And sometimes, even with the best intentions, it is very difficult to be able to know how the water is going to flow, or whether there has been an obstacle created along the way that has stopped the system that we've created from it being as effective as we would like it to be. We have spent, Madam Acting Speaker, in the last 2 years, certainly over 1.5 million in the detention ponds, trying to alleviate these challenges. We have a number of other areas that we have identified across the country that are also on the list for consideration. Again, as I said before, those which are under the state are not so much of an issue, but there are some that are on private lands that we have to make sure that we address the issues of ownership, that we address and we make sure that we have those consultations with the residents so that they can agree to whatever it is that government needs to do to alleviate flooding across communities. The maintenance, however, of the detention ponds, again, is perhaps a challenge, but also something which we have recognized that we have to continue to address. Some of them are maintained by the landowners on sites such as Brighton and Walker's Plantation, and over by the Gymnasium Limited. Some private owners retain and look after these sites. But you also have the other detention ponds where we have to work with the NCC in order to be able to help clear those areas. Because I think all of us recognize that even with the best intentions, sometimes the bush starts to grow up around the same areas that we have cleared a few months before. The rains come in and then all of a sudden the bush grows up. You can't even see where the pond was because it hasn't, the mouth to get to a number of these areas has not been properly maintained. That is something I believe that we have to, as we spend these types of monies to improve the issues of flooding across communities, we have to look at better systems now for being able to deal with the issue of maintenance. And that is across all of government. Currently, the Parole Secretary and the MP for St. Andrew, Honourable Member for St. Andrew, is working with NCC and the team at MTW to come up with a system that would be able to better deploy the human resources across the National Conservation Commission, the MTW. As you know, we have ash workers who would have been brought in who are now national cleanup workers, and to be able to even work with agriculture to make sure that we deploy people across communities to clean the drains, to clean out the wells, to make sure that we are able to alleviate a lot of the debris that settles in these locations and creates problems for Barbadians. The good thing I can say to the country today is that as we transition the ash workers or the national cleanup workers, one of the things that MTW has been focusing on is ensuring that we develop a number of programs for those workers whereby we can hire them back to work for the ministry simply because we are looking at the core functions of the MTW. And by that, what do I mean? Every year we have issues in relation to tree trimming. MPs always calling me, they want trees trimmed in particular districts. We've got chainsaws in the ministry, and rather than us being reactive to people calling, I would like us to get to a point where throughout the year we are able to address these concerns. So we want a cadre of people who can cut down the trees, trim the trees. I have gone to great expense, Madam Speaker, acting to outlay expense for, in my own community, being able to cut down trees of the elderly people because they themselves couldn't afford it. Because the MTW only cuts the trees that are overhanging in the road or that are affecting through Light and Power. Light and Power would intervene if they're affecting the electrical wiring. But I've had to incur that cost, and the cost then also sometimes goes higher when in error sometimes a young man may slip and use the chainsaw and the piece of tree falls down on somebody paling, and then that person gets upset and then they want to claim back that you gotta protect the paling and you gotta fix the doghouse and you gotta do all kinds of things that were not intended. It becomes a very expensive exercise to do it for individual homeowners. But I do feel that we need, this is a major problem as we grapple with the climate change, that we have to have persons properly trained to be able to cut the trees down and to make sure that whether they are working for the ministry, whether they are independently engaged, or whether they can set up their own businesses with the assistance of all of the other government agencies, that we have a cadre of persons who can offer these services reasonably to residents in communities to be able to provide this particular service. The other area that we've said we will transition our workers to help in this area at MTW is obviously the issues of gabion building. We have a number of projects coming on stream. We said, again, the flooding affects a number of these projects, certainly in the Scotland district, where we need to ensure that we prevent the land slippage. We've already had a number of persons employed addressing the gabions, learning how to do the gabions. We're making sure, with the assistance of the Honourable Minister of Education, that we're able to certify those persons. But not just certify them, be able to have another cadre of persons coming to the fore to be able to learn how to do gabions and to build gabions, so that as we accelerate our roadworks program across the country, utilizing gabions, that we have young people who can actually engage in these areas as well. We've looked at the issue of the debushing. We will still have persons who will have to clean residential communities, because each of us in communities have pockets and areas where we definitely need to have a team of persons still doing it. So our transition is not intended to get rid of people or reduce the workload of the ministry, but rather to empower people to be able to help them to transition, to help with a number of the things that the Ministry of Public Works currently does, in particular assisting with these issues of drainage. And perhaps the other critical area is increasing the number of pump teams that we have that assist with flooding. Currently, that unit is extremely challenged, particularly during the hurricane season. They have to respond constantly to calls regarding areas that need to be pumped of water. As you heard, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central spoke of yesterday, her concerns of being a child and having to walk, her mother being concerned about her walking through water. These are real issues, and we therefore need to make sure that we are sensitive to the concerns that people have in relation to the difficulties experienced by flooding. Being able to increase our pump teams will allow us to have a better response time to a number of these concerns, because as far as I'm concerned, the time that is lost with the disruption caused by these activities results in unproductive time for work and for school as well. A child who can't go to school because the area outside is flooded and they don't have a pair of boots or galoshes to be able to get out is a problem for our society as well. And therefore, while we can't fix everything overnight, there are some key things that we have identified within certainly my ministry that we have to make sure that we ramp up the human resources in order to be able to help us with these types of issues that relate to flooding. My last point, Madam Speaker, acting, relates to the issue of the relocation of these persons. I'm pleased that the persons will be relocated, that we're going to have the compulsory acquisition of these lands. I will say that I have expressed concern to the Honourable Minister, and I know that he is certainly working with his team in housing on this issue. But it is one that, as Minister of Public Works, that I have encountered over the last few months, which is that we have a number of individuals and communities where we have encountered challenges, not only with flooding, but other issues, land slippage and other issues. And we needed to have not just a dedicated team within the Ministry of Housing, but a multi-ministry approach to dealing with a number of these reciting issues. We don't want that the situation is one where a pronouncement is made, we're going to move somebody, but then 6 years later, 16 years later, those persons have not been relocated. Or that we said we were going to identify lands and we haven't identified the lands, or that we have identified the lands but running water needs to go in, or roads need to go in, and there's not a dedicated committee of ministers and technical people being able to oversee these types of activities, because I feel the frustration of our people when we make these pronouncements that we are going to alleviate hardship. But then on the other hand, we take so long to be able to make it a reality that in the interim, you have additional children coming into the household at times, you have additional people coming into the household at times, creating those overcrowded and not necessary situations for people. And so this matter has taken a long time in terms of our being able to alleviate the flooding, but equally I would hope that the Honourable Minister and the team would work expeditiously to be able to ensure that these persons are relocated as quickly as possible and recited. I am pleased that the signatures and the monies have gone off to be able to facilitate the purchase of the Juravilla homes. Madam Speaker Acting, I must tell you that nothing pleases my heart in more than knowing that we are on a certain trajectory to being able to alleviate some of the issues of housing. I wish we could do 50,000, I wish we could do 100,000, because I see the need for housing across Barbados. Two of the main things people ask me every day is for a request for housing, or it is a request for employment. And the truth is that our demands on housing are not just for people who have to be recited. They are for people who are disabled. They are for people who are fire victims. They are people who are are most vulnerable in our society. They are for the persons who are elderly. And as a consequence, the demands are greater than our ability at times as a government to be able to respond to the request. The reason why we had all those requests at NHC isn't because people have nothing better to do with their time. They've requested housing because they live in densely populated communities, in densely populated households. And therefore, we must never forget what the philosophy is that underpins these types of resolutions by this administration. We have said we must ensure that we make life better for Barbadians, for all Barbadians. We did not say we will discriminate against those who have squatted on lands and who have done so indiscriminately. We have said we will make life better for all. And when we have recognized a problem, we have sought as a government to alleviate those challenges that people have found themselves in. I am going to keep saying it until the public appreciates what I am saying. People do not decide to go and squat anywhere with no running water to have their children at a standpipe bathing to be able to get ready for school. There is nobody I know that takes pride in so doing. And therefore, as a government, because we recognize that the pace at which we may move as government from time to time is not as quick as the pace at which the population is exploding, we understand that we must continue to cater for those at the bottom. Because if those persons cannot cater for themselves, then we must put the necessary systems in place to be able to cater for them. Not that we are encouraging anything, but we recognize that we are talking about elderly people, we're talking about children who have, again, made this their home, and therefore we have to take steps to make life better for them. My last point is as it relates to the fact that as we do this, we are also looking at things like the sewering in the Chapman Lane area. The honourable members who represent various communities where we have identified for the better sewering. In all of those communities, we've met with the MPs, we've started to look at the designs. I think we have a team going in shortly with some of the community residents to be able to start to talk about the design work and the preparatory work rather, that has to be done in these communities in order to make that a reality. I am well aware that these are issues that have been long-standing. From I was a little girl, ma'am, these are issues that have been front-burner issues for successive administrations and ours. I hope that I live long enough to be able to bring resolution to people to ordinary Barbadians who believe that they don't matter because they have come by lands, not necessarily by way of a conveyance, but they have settled on lands in circumstances which are in danger to their health and to the health of others. Because any threat to our water supply is a threat to all Barbadians, Madam Speaker Acting. And therefore, we have to, as a government, treat to these issues in a serious manner. We have to make sure that persons across Barbados are connected to the treatment plants to make sure that these things are not left on the back burner. And that is why, while we work assiduously to unlock financing, and our economic team is out there unlocking financing for us to be able to improve the lives of Barbadians, that we also talk the country through what we are doing. Because we can't do all of these big picture things if we don't have money. We must be able to access finance if we are going to be able to make life better for Barbadians. But the magnitude sometimes of what we have to do is as a result of the fact that, as I said at the outset, we have never been able to sit down and say, we are going to create Bridgetown, And in Bridgetown, we're going to create these proper systems of sanitation and healthcare and all of these things in the city. And therefore, then we're going to have people moving into that particular location. We've never been able to do that. So oftentimes, it feels like you're spinning top in mud because you are constantly playing catch up. You are constantly responding to emergency situations because we find ourselves often not having been able to plan effectively. And that is why we take so much time now when we are doing new developments, Madam Speaker Acting, to ensure that we put a lot of these things in place, that we are able to get the housing program off the ground, to ensure that we have developments being created through relocation and construction, that people actually have these services already facilitated in those particular communities so that we can discourage the indiscriminate squatting and the indiscriminate use of land space when it compromises the lives of those individuals and the lives of others, ma'am. It is a policy, it is a philosophy that the Barbados Labour Party has long held dear. It is one where we believe that we have to include people in these types of decisions. We have to look at these issues holistically, because what happens in one community, if we allow these things to happen where we have densely populated areas, as we all are well aware, what happens in terms of the crime and criminal activity in the country. I know that the Honourable Minister will be bringing the resolution shortly in relation to the Lower Bernese area, which part of those lands were intended to ease the densely populated nature of the Golden Rock housing area in the Pine, and to be able to facilitate for persons who are in overcrowded conditions, in conditions where the houses have not been touched in many ways over the course of the last 40 years almost. In some cases, the structures are crumbling. In some cases, they are overcrowded. And as a consequence, we have to address these issues by way of the very focused housing program that we have before us. So, Madam Speaker, I wish to support the resolution, wish to indicate to this House that, again, this is a positive step in the right direction, and to remind all Barbadians that this government and certainly this Labour Party will continue to put an acceptable quality of not only housing, but an acceptable quality of life as paramount for all Barbadians of all walks of life, and that we will continue to work towards the goal of being able to change and to transform the lives of ordinary people in this country. Ma'am, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member St. George South, please.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. First, let me congratulate and thank the members who spoke on this resolution to acquire these 3 parcels of land at Kedgerton, the road, and Becker's land. I'm not going to be too long, but there are just a few things that I want to comment on. And first, let me comment on the words of the Acting Prime Minister, member for St. Michael's Southeast. And certainly, Acting Speaker, members of this chamber, and those who are listening, and I will marry her comments with the comments of the member for St. Michael's South Central, and speed and scale. Because, very often, persons say they don't listen to debates now, but if you listen to the last 2 members who spoke, it was indeed comprehensive, and it touched on the key areas of building out a housing policy. Scale and speed is paramount. And I start there because when we set about this journey, this silent revolution, housing revolution, some people thought that the government alone will build out the housing stock in this country to alleviate some of the challenges, and not only housing challenges. And I mentioned it earlier because I mentioned the whole role of a house. It's not just a dwelling place. But persons and the member for St. Michael Southeast hit on it, and I will spin it a different way because we have moved away from this statement of owning a piece of the rock to owning our own homes. And it's the will of parents and it's the will of guardians not only to own a home, but to leave something for their children and the guardians, and so that they can leave a legacy behind, not only in housing, but to allow persons to move from strength to strength and become the best they can be in this lovely little place that we call ours, Barbados. And this is not just about us going into Murphy's Land and fixing a drainage issue and building 7 houses. This is a more comprehensive policy, similar to the housing neighborhood upgrade project that we articulated and we brought to fruition in 2007, signed by Owen Seymour Arthur, or initiated by the former Prime Minister. And I spoke to that earlier. I'm not going back there because I'm not here wrapping up to wash any linen and to curse anybody in the last administration. We know what they didn't do from what they did. And speed and scale and the need for us to execute is critical. But we cannot do it on our own. That's why private-public partnerships are critical. That's why we formed the state-owned commercial entity, Hope Inc. That's why we have joint venture partnership at Atlantic Breeze. We have some other joint venture partnerships. Atlantic Breeze is 300 houses being built. And we have a project, and while I was here sitting with the senior minister, we discussed it, listening to the contribution of the member for St. Michael South Central when she spoke on speed and scale. And currently we have a housing project. It's a private-led project at Ridge Development, and there are many, but I will just mention that where we have some 600 houses being built, and thus far they have constructed 250. And it's not just houses going up there, but they have diverse amenities like supermarkets and where persons can go and do the barbering and stuff. So there is a commercial village within that 75-acre lot that we are building houses, that the private sector is engaged in housing solutions. I want to thank the member for Christchurch West because he was speedily to approve the application to ensure that the commercial side of that development is indeed taking place. And when persons go to buy a house, they're not just buying a house to live, but like I said, they are buying a home and they're buying a place where they can access various amenities and services. And when you speak to speed and scale, that is what you need. Gone are the days when we are going to be building 30 houses to satisfy the demand. And various options have been offered. We have like gauge steel houses, we have hardwood houses, and we have the farm houses. And I think someone came into the country only yesterday to meet with senior minister and myself to discuss another housing proposal, another type of housing. And of course that would have to get the will of cabinet before we can discuss anything further on that. But there are various options, that we have embarked upon as a government to indeed build out the silent revolution that we speak about so glowingly, and we seek to give the people the level of comfort, especially at the base of the pyramid. When you look at the pyramid, the majority of the people are at the base, and those are persons in the lower socioeconomic bracket. And that's where we have focused, not only there, but that's where we have concentrated most of our energies, member for St. Michael East, in order to give our people in that category a hand up and give them something that they can call their own, something that they can take to our banks and our credit unions to say, hey, listen, look, I am marketable, I have assets, and I can go forward and I can accumulate wealth. And that is what is lacking in this country. So don't only see us building houses as a way for someone to go and put down their head and sleep. That is important too. But the ability to accumulate wealth and to move persons from the informal sector to the formal sector where they can be recognized, and banks would want them to enter their doors, where they can start businesses because they have collateral. They have something called an asset in a home. And these are some of the things that we have to think about. It's not just a house that we are building, but we are building an economy. We are uplifting people socially, economically. And as we speak to, and I'm looking at the member for St. Michael East, because we are going to the bell as well in addressing some of these challenges and dealing with the issue like we are dealing with at Rock Hall. And I know the member is asking us to find land in St. Michael East, you know, where his people will stay with him. Put it simple, and he said he's looking for something, that's all for me too. Don't let us go there this afternoon. But Acting Speaker, Madam Acting Speaker, I hope I'm driving home the point that this resolution, while we accept that we will address some of the challenges on Murphy's Pasture, while we accept the fact that we will be able to house 20 families on 3 sets of land that we are acquiring here in the Lord Chamber. But we have to accept that we have a problem in the urban corridor. The urban regeneration, the urban renewal is a bigger problem. But let me end off, though, Acting Speaker, Madam Acting Speaker, by referencing again the member for St. Michael's South Central and the whole aspect of derelict housing and vacant lots. And she mentioned the need to, I don't want to misquote her, but she mentioned the need for us to re-engineer and plan better because we don't have access to the monies that years ago and administrations before had. And the last administration had 80 million. We put 80 million Barbados. We put 20 in a co-financing deal between the government and IDB. And I can't forget that because money is not plentiful now. And I use the term, I said, and somebody quote me, Dwight, you mentioned in Parliament, you don't have a war chest, which is true. I don't have a war chest. So that's why the derelict housing and vacant lots, that's a very important project as we seek to provide these housing solutions for many Barbadians and many persons that are within the low socio-economic bracket and also the middle income bracket. As we come below that pyramid, as we come down that pyramid, there are more to serve as you come down that pyramid and to provide a service for with respect to housing. The derelict lots in this country, there are some 15,000 unoccupied houses and some 20,000 vacant lots across the island. The news to this chamber, and thank you for raising it, member for St. Michael South Central, we have prepared a draft paper within the ministry, and we are currently, we met 2 weeks ago, and we are fine-tuning this paper, where we are looking at the possibility of an SPV, special purpose vehicle, where we can come in and address this project without having a drain on the consolidated fund and impacting our fiscal position and the balance sheet. Those are some of the things that we are looking at. Because within the realm of the 15,000 unoccupied houses, derelict houses, most are derelict houses, and vacant lots. What we have there, we have services there, we have infrastructure, we have water, we have light. So it is easier for us to utilize these 35,000. I don't know how much of those we can really achieve or we will achieve, but we are going after the 15,000 unoccupied houses and we are going after the 20,000 vacant lots. And soon to be, we will prepare a paper once agreed to by the various managers within the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, and of course, National Housing Corporation. I will take it to Parliament as the minister responsible for this ministry and seeks cabinet input. And I know cabinet certainly will have an input and thereafter approval that we can help provide within the urban corridor, because this resolution though, and the member for St. Michael South Central touched on it, on one of the lots, there exists a derelict house. And on the other plot, which is the larger plot, we have bush, vacant lot, nothing, person squatting on it. So we have started that process as we seek to address the challenges at Murphy Pastor. And I want to thank the officers within the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, particularly the Chief Property Manager, Permanent Secretary, and all those within the Property Management Division, because they did the groundwork, lands and surveys. So it would be remiss of me to wrap up this debate and don't mention those persons who played a pivotal role, and I already mentioned the former Minister of Housing who did the work. But indeed, it is real. We are focusing on derelict properties, vacant lots, not only to build houses, but to clean up and make the urban corridor and also the rural corridor more beautiful and attractive, and a place that persons will feel comfortable doing business, working, living, going to school, and developing. So, Acting Speaker, as I wrap up, we will seek to, as the member for St. Michael Southeast asks, that we don't only acquire these lands, but that as we acquire these lands, we make sure that the persons who are listening to us in Murphy's Pastor, who depend on us for speedy resolution, that the officers will understand that this is about part of the process. And the reason why the last administration failed, because they didn't know the why or the what and how to implement. And we have taken it a step further to acquire the lands. And certainly, Acting Speaker, Madam Acting Speaker, we intend to ensure that this process don't take us far too long into this term as we seek to build out the housing stock and address some of the challenges within the urban and the rural corridor. And particularly as I speak to this particular resolution, and while we were preparing documents for this resolution, we lost 2 more lives in the city, in the vicinity of the areas that indeed we are to make right and address, either through White Park Road relocation and addressing in Greenfield, Cat's Castle, the New Orleans area, the Kensington New Road. We lost 2 lives again, a young man, and I keep saying the majority of lives that we're losing to gun violence are under 35. We have a role to play in the Ministry of Housing, and we intend to move swiftly, Acting Speaker, to address some of these challenges that are tangential to housing, but are critical for our people's survival and our young people to exist in this country and to make Barbados a place again that is violent-free and a place to live, work, do business, raise a family, and a place of good vibes. And with those words, Acting Speaker, I now beg that this resolution pass. Thank you.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This resolution do not pass.
Madam Acting Speaker, the committal of papers.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. I beg to, I'm commanded to lay the conservation funding agreement dated the September 20th, 2022 among the Government of Barbados, the Nature Conservancy, the Barbados Environmental Sustainable Fund, Inc., and Barbados Blue Conservation Trust. I'm also commanded to lay the Conservation and Sustainability Commitments Agreement dated as of September 20th, 2022 between the Government of Barbados and the Nature Conservancy.
Government business.
Acting. With that, we have come to the end of today's sitting, albeit that your tenure here with us has been temporary and short. I think I can speak on behalf of all honourable members in thanking you for filling in for the Honourable Speaker, and to therefore move the adjournment of the House until the 15th of November at 10 a.m.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader. I wish to also express my gratitude to you all for your patience and your guidance. And therefore, the question is that the adjournment now be November the 15th, 2022 in the forenoon for the next sitting. Honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. I wish to thank you very much.